Welcome back, everybody, to Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast. This is your host, Cade Nadsett, and a lot of interesting things, as always, here. A lot of things to dive into here in the last couple days over the weekend that we saw unravel. And for most of the state of Wisconsin, hope a lot of you guys didn't experience too much of inclement weather, or at least damaging weather. Actually, yesterday, of course, had quite a bit of rough weather in the state of Wisconsin. In fact, the town that I was in, staying over the weekend, actually had a tornado touchdown. Luckily, didn't really see too much other than some pretty crazy lightning. Saw some winds pick up and stuff, but didn't end up seeing any hail or anything. Just some rain, and quite a bit of it, of course. But did stink a little bit. Did end up having my brother's baseball tournament canceled for the weekend. They had canceled it originally on Saturday. Just Saturday's games. Were looking to play Sunday, and then because of that storm and all the excessive amounts of rain and whatever that we had, ended up canceling the game on Sunday. So kind of stunk that we, of course, everybody ended up making the trip to do that, but not anything you can control in anybody's case over the weather. But hopefully for you guys out there, hopefully you, like I said, hopefully you didn't experience too much inclement weather or damaging weather to any extent. Hopefully there wasn't too much flooding or, tree damage, whatever it could be. I didn't really see anything on the drive back this earlier there yesterday. Didn't really see too much of anything that looked too bad in terms of what the storm left behind, but I think it seemed like across Wisconsin for the most part there were a couple tornadoes touched down, I know, and then just some inclement weather all through together. So back to the Brewers to start this podcast episode. I want to wrap up, obviously, that series against the Los Angeles Angels. Didn't get a chance to wrap up that one. And then we'll dive into, of course, what we saw here through the 4 games of the Padres series. Kind of a series that I was a little worried going into. I think the Padres, record-wise, being a little bit below 500 coming into this series, I think was a little bit deceiving. I really did. I think the Padres have a roster with a much better team, much stronger team than what's showing in their record. I really think they're in a division that's pretty tough. I mean, obviously you got the Dodgers on a pretty consistent basis, facing teams, Giants, Rockies not doing too hot, but even the Diamondbacks. I mean, even though the Diamondbacks aren't having the strongest season, the Giants are having a mid to 500 type season as well at this point. But I think these teams are pretty strong in that division, and I think the Padres have some things that they were dealing with early season. Brewers saw them in Milwaukee, where they were actually swept by the Padres there in Milwaukee. I think they did pull out one game. I think they lost 2 out of 3, but I don't entirely remember in that series. But even then, struggled against them here again in this series. Lost 3 out of 4, but we will dive into that. Just want to cover up on this game on Wednesday that wrapped up that Angels series before we dive too much into that. So Brewers wrap up the series against the Angels with a 2-0 victory. Pretty exciting thing that we saw in that game. Freddie Peralta finally able to bounce back and have a good outing. We've seen him, especially early in games. I've talked about this a lot in the last couple episodes where he's been a part of those conversations. And the matter of the fact is that he's just not really commanding his stuff very well. A lot of big misses in the zone, out of the zone, that just aren't very competitive pitches. The fastball at times is way high, way outside. The off-speed pitches, just the big thing, like I've mentioned, about those off-speed pitches is starting them as strikes and letting them come back over the plate and end up getting a swing or a miss, or whatever it may be. Even if the batter does end up taking a good take, they at least had to think about that pitch all the way through. As difference as soon as the ball comes out of his hand, it's just an automatic take, automatic layoff. So I think he did a lot better job in this one. Obviously recorded 8 strikeouts, not too many hits in this one. So this is the Freddie Peralta that we're expecting, and this is the Freddie Peralta that we're always hoping for, especially after Corbin Burns being gone this year, Brandon Woodruff. This is the Freddie Peralta that we need to have carry this team, especially with some of the news that we've seen recently. Robert Gasser just made a big decision, had talked about that he had that third opinion that didn't end up going too well, basically where it left up a decision for him in his career in this season. Basically to the point of that there was a slight tear, but not to the point where he wasn't necessarily unable to pitch this season, but the risk of having that injury continue on and worsen, the longevity of his career potentially. I think what Gazzer's decision was inevitably to sit out the rest of the season, get that Tommy John surgery, which obviously will end his season here for 2024. And I think as frustrating as it is, I think that this is a good decision. I feel like it's the right decision, especially as young as he is and the success that he's had. He's obviously showing the stuff that he has can play in the major leagues. He got whatever it was, 4 or 5 starts under his belt, and he had some really good outcomes. Won a few games there in that stretch. At that point, he was our strongest pitcher in the rotation, most consistent pitcher in the rotation, and really only that one start against the Miami Marlins where even there was some trouble in that game. I think he gave up like 10 hits or something like that, if I remember right. Don't have the numbers here in front of me, but I think it was 10 hits, something like that, and a lot of it was just the soft contact. And it seemed like since that start, he made the adjustment that he needed to, was rolling, was pitching really well, and then of course we see another Brewers pitcher end up on the injured list, and now is going to be out for the rest of the season to join Brandon Woodruff, Wade Miley on that injured list for the rest of the season type of deal. So obviously not good news and frustrating to have yet another starter lost for the Milwaukee Brewers. But like I said, I think in the longevity of his career, it's the right decision. You go into that decision thinking about, okay, yes, I could pitch this season. I could maybe have a couple of good games, could have a couple of games where it doesn't really bother me. But it seems like a lot of times with those injuries, once you have a slight tear, it's only going to keep getting worse. And the risk that becomes like a full tear or whatever, obviously I'm not in any place to say medically what exactly is going on there or what the decision is with that. But I think from my standpoint, whenever you have a slight tear, from what I've heard, is the farther it develops, it doesn't necessarily, you don't even realize it, that it's continuing to tear until it gets to a point of, you tear the entire muscle or you just tear too much of it, that the ratio of what strength is still there is just not there. So I feel like there's a lot higher risk that he ends up injuring it and potentially ending his career even at a young age. So I think it's the right decision, as frustrating as it is, like I said. I think it's the right decision in this case to sit out, don't press on, don't try and make matters worse of what they already are, and hopefully he's able to come back maybe midway through next year, because I think it's about a 12-month recovery is what they were saying, meaning that he'll miss the remainder of this season and probably a decent stretch of next season. But hopefully with the training staff that we have and the workouts that these guys go through to strengthen that, he's able to come back stronger or just come back the same that he was and get a feel back for the baseball and have some luck with that. So I know we're seeing some worry out of that right now. Aaron Ashby, who never really exploited, I think, early on in his career, the success that he had before that in the minor leagues and whatnot. I don't think we had really seen too much of that, but which we're going to talk just a little bit about him here towards the end of the episode. But just not what you want to see with Robert Gasser, with the success that he's had. And I think there is potential for him to return and come back strong. Like I was saying about Aaron Ashby, it seems like ever since that Tommy John surgery, he just has not been able to find that path back to the majors right now. A couple starts that we've sprinkled in there, but his minor league numbers right now at this point, I just actually ended up looking at them a little while ago. Hadn't really known exactly how he was doing. Thought about maybe having him come back up, but his numbers do not jump off the board. Or if they do jump off the board, it's in a very negative manner. So we're going to talk about that here a little bit towards the end. But before we get to that, I want to talk about a little bit more of what we saw in that San Diego Padres series. We saw a couple of rough games, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Brewers lose all 3 of those games. Thursday was a very back-and-forth type style. Brewers offense, I think, did a really good job fighting back. They scored they scored a run in the 8th and a couple runs in the 9th to tie the game, before Jake Cronenworth ended up getting what was the Padres at that point 3rd game in a row with a walk-off home run at home. Not consecutive days, but going back to the last series they played, they had a couple of games that it walked in a walk-off home run fashion. So kind of a crazy stat from that point. Not often that you see 3 home games in a row with walk-off home runs. But Cronenworth hit that game-winning home run off of Yoel Payamps, who the 2 batters before that, it was Tatis and blanking right now. I cannot think who was the other batter, but he made those 2 hitters look ugly. He had the fastball going and just not able to retire Cronenworth and get out of that inning. So definitely not exactly what you wanted to see, but I think the Brewers did a really nice job battling back and forth and keeping the game close. Like I say, I've said this so many times, and I know I keep saying it, but I think it's something that I have to make light of in these losing situations, is that the Brewers are always right there. They're always within the 1, 2, 3 runs. In Friday's game's case, it ended up being 4, but even then, that was a game where the Brewers were really never out of it until the very end. So it's definitely good to see and bring light out of the negative manner that they're losing, that these games remain very competitive, and the Brewers continue to give themselves a chance. So yeah, Brewers Friday, moving on into that game, as I just kind of touched on that, the final score 9-5 in that game. Brewers at one point were leading that game 4-1, but I think the big thing in honestly these first 3 games, and we saw this on Friday to allow the Padres to come back into this game. We saw some other things from Thursday's game. We ended up seeing 4 total home runs against the Brewers pitching staff, and we saw a couple more on Friday, which was the big thing that allowed the Padres to come back, and then 3 on Saturday. So really the one thing that stood out to me was the home run ball and how it played for the San Diego Padres. Obviously, the Padres right now are without one of their better hitters in Xander Bogaerts, who is out, I believe, for the season with that shoulder injury. So really a bad thing to see him end up having to sit the rest of the season. But they've got power. They've got some really good players. They've obviously got Tatis, who we didn't see in Sunday's game, but they've got Manny Machado, who's always been known for his power bat. Jake Cronenworth has had some really good power numbers over some of the seasons in his career. Jurickson Profar's putting together an all-star type season, and we're going to touch on that a little bit too, some of the ratings that we're with right now in the all-star games. But Jackson Merrill, he's an incredible rookie right now for the San Diego Padres as well. So all of these guys, basically up and down their lineup provide some pop, and that's a big thing that the Brewers have been struggling with pitching-wise, is the home run ball, especially the starting pitching. Bryce Wilson got roughed up there in that game on Thursday. Saw Colin Rea, after a pretty solid first few innings, ended up getting roughed up, mainly in that 4th inning, but the Padres were able to claw back and end up winning that game. And Saturday we saw the same thing. Carlos Rodriguez, just another start for him that hasn't really been very eye-opening for the most part. He's had some pretty mediocre stuff, had some pretty mediocre numbers for the most part. Nothing that's really jumping off the stat sheet too negatively, and still early, obviously got to give this guy time. But I think we've seen quite a few things that just don't seem to be flowing right with that right now. So I think that was the big thing that stuck out to me in these games. And I do hate to bring this up, but I think the Thursday and Friday games really stuck out to me the most in this aspect. I think there were a couple things that were very frustrating. Andy Fletcher on Thursday did not have a good ball game at all. 21 missed calls total, 14 of those going against the Brewers, and a .98 run differential or favor in the San Diego Padres' direction in that game. And then to follow up that, on Friday's game, we saw a 1.05 run favor for the Padres on Friday's game. So not so much on Friday's game. I don't feel like it made too much of a difference. Obviously, anything near a 1-run favor is not good to see, especially when it's going against your team in not one, but back-to-back games. But that game against Andy Fletcher was, I think, the big starter to the series that just really kind of poked you in the side a little bit. Saw a couple of really, I think, game-turning calls that maybe weren't accounted for as many runs as I think should have been. Gary Sanchez in one of the at-bats, and I think it was the 7th or 8th, with runners on 2nd and 3rd, nobody out, had a ball that was a couple inches off the plate outside, ended up getting called for a strike. And as a pitcher, I mean, you'd go into an at-bat up 0-1 as opposed to being behind 1-0 in the count. It's a big difference changer, especially Gary Sanchez likes to swing early in the count, struggling a little bit at the plate here with the strikeout ball. And so, of course, in his mind, he's already down in the count and trying to almost be in protect mode to not strike out again. So big difference in that call. And, of course, Brewers didn't help themselves. Like I say, I never am going to blame these games just strictly on the umpires. In that game on Thursday, big critical thing, Bryce Terang makes I don't believe it was credited an error, but ended up bobbling the ball, and which didn't allow Willy Adames to have the time to throw. What would have been an inning-ending double play at first base ended up being safe, getting only the force out at second, which would have ended the inning, which then followed by 3-run home run from Manny Machado, and then I believe it was a back-to-back home run from Jackson Merrill. So you get 4 runs in that inning that shouldn't have been on the board, and you're talking about a completely different ball game here in that Thursday game. But like I say, I never want to talk about, the umpires completely botching games and completely favoring one team or the other. But when I looked at those games, it just seemed like they were so there was just not much correspondence through who was getting favored calls. It seemed like there was quite a bit of differential between the Padres calls and just not very consistent either. I think the consistency seemed like it was way off. He would call one ball, for the Padres pitcher in the same spot as Bryce Wilson would throw it, and there would be 2 different outcomes. And it was just a little bit frustrating from that aspect. Like I said, then to be followed up with a 1+ run differential or favor in the second game for the Padres. Third game, Brewers, and I'm not going to leave out, I'm not going to completely leave this out, but Brewers were favored in that third game, but just by 0.18 runs. And I think you look at those numbers, that's much more reasonable in terms of, obviously, of course, at the end of every game, you're probably going to have some favor one way or the other in some minute realm, but an entire run versus, a tenth or a fifth of a run, in this case, close to 0.18, pretty close there to 0.12 if you're talking about terms of fraction. And then Game 4 right now is still pending. I think that'll probably be out later today. But as far as I could tell from the game call, it seemed actually like this umpire did probably the best out of the 4 in this game just on Sunday. So I think that one will probably be pretty even. I'm not exactly sure on that, but I think that last game will be pretty even. So I just did want to point on that topic. Not to say that Colin Rea or Carlos Rodriguez or Bryce Wilson pitched a very good game. And even the bullpen had a little bit of some rough innings in that Thursday or Friday game. It just seemed like we couldn't really escape the multi-run innings for the Padres and that home run ball. So definitely not exactly what you wanted to see. But Brewers able to bounce back big in that Sunday game. Brewers actually able to kind of stop the bleeding before returning home against the Texas Rangers. Ended up collecting a victory there in that game. And big second inning for the Brewers. They score 5 runs in the second inning, 4 of which came with 2 outs, with RBI hits from Frelick, which was the hit without. That was only with 1 out in the inning. We saw Perkins with a 2-out, 2 RBI base hit, Turang with an RBI triple, and Tyler Black collects his first career RBI in the major leagues, which I didn't end up even actually touching on this now that I think about it. But Tyler Black returns back to the Brewers. Saw a couple moves there earlier in the week. We saw Jacob Junis returned. He pitched on Saturday's game, ended up giving up a run, but a pretty solid positive outing to come back for him. We saw Tyler Black. He's replacing Oliver Dunn, who just wasn't really doing anything very well in the majors. We saw Tyler Black hitting about 260 with 5 home runs and 8 stolen bases since he came back, or since he went back down to AAA, excuse me. So he's been putting together some pretty positive numbers. Earned his way back up to an MLB roster on the Brewers roster spot, like I said, replacing Oliver Dunn. And then just some other things. We saw Blaylock. He made his MLB debut for the Milwaukee Brewers. Pretty solid outing for him, but he ended up getting sent back down to AAA in replace of Jacob Junis getting called up. And as far as I'm concerned, Jacob Junis right now is going to strictly be in a relief position. I think at some point we totally could see one of these guys in Junis, maybe even Hudson, maybe Koenig. I think one of these guys potentially deserves to get a starting role position. Koenig has been very good out of the relief position, a lot better than what people have thought of him to be. Brian Hudson's putting together an all-star type season so far, I think, for a non-closer or non-starter, which a lot of times these mid-relief type pitchers don't really see much for all-star type ratings, but we saw Josh Hader do it a couple seasons ago when he was with the Brewers. We saw Devin Williams do it as the setup man for Josh Hader. So I think it's very possible that he could maybe end up, or at least I think is deserving of him being in the conversation to be an all-star type player, just to kind of credit him for the season that he's putting together. And in this game, he delivered another couple great scoreless innings, bringing his ERA down to .86. So like I said, he just continues to feel like he should be an all-star with the numbers he's putting up, continues to be pitching in those close, clutch situation games for Pat Murphy, and he continues to come through and has been doing an excellent job in that role. And I think he's definitely been the most solid bullpen guy out of the Brewers rotation, or out of the Brewers bullpen, which I do think brings up an interesting point. Maybe Brian Hudson isn't the best guy to put in a starting position, because what you don't want to have happen is that, easy as it would sound, if you put him in a starting role and he ends up getting roughed up even, a couple of starts or something like that, you try, okay, that didn't work, let's put him right back into the relief position. Well, sometimes with these guys, you almost don't want to do that, because I've seen it before where you move a guy from relief who's has been putting together some very positive outings, putting together some very strong numbers. You move him into the starting rotation, he has a couple of struggles, you try to move him back to the bullpen, and it just doesn't come back to what he was doing before. It continues to be a struggle. It continues to be a point of issue for him, having those couple of bad outings. Sometimes, like I said, it's so funny how this game in baseball can be such a mental sport, how it depends on a confidence level. If you're not confident in your stuff and throwing a ball, we've seen Brian Hudson do it several times. It almost seems like he throws a get-me-over fastball at 92 miles an hour down the middle, just because he's got confidence in that pitch and playing along with the batter's head of what he's expecting them to be expecting. And I think that has such a big thing in this game. And so you have him go out, have a couple of rough outings, and maybe he doesn't feel so comfortable back in that relief position anymore, and he becomes a mediocre-type bullpen guy where it's almost like 50-50, he's going to have a good outing or he's going to give up a run. And so I think right now maybe Brian Hudson isn't the option, but I think Jared Koenig, I think that's an option. I think Jacob Junis, once give him a few weeks, give him that development, continue to get that arm and shoulder stronger, make sure he's healthy, and then I think maybe consider moving him into a starting position role, because as of right now, I don't think Carlos Rodriguez is really that guy to put in. I don't think he's really that. I think he's doing a nice job in a fill-in role right now, but the way he's pitching, I just don't think that he's the answer at this point. I think the Brewers still need to try and go out and make a move. Like I said, I was looking into it. I was thinking Aaron Ashby was going to be potentially a good option, but I did pull up his numbers for the minor leagues, and he has just not been pitching very well. And looking at his numbers there in AAA over the last few starts, of course, on June 5th, we saw him pitch in the major leagues again against the Philadelphia Phillies. That was a pretty good outing, 5 innings pitched. Just the 5 walks was the big thing that stood up on the box score for me. That was kind of a concern, but only 2 earned runs given up, collected 3 strikeouts. And so you send him back to AAA, hope that, of course, he's able to build on some of that, get some more confidence, have some good outings. But take a look at these numbers in these last 3 starts here in June in AAA Nashville. Haven't been pretty. On June 11th, we saw 5 innings pitched, gave up 7 earned runs, 4 walks, 1 strikeout. June 16th, gave up only on 3 innings, gave up 8 hits, 4 earned runs, 4 strikeouts, and 3 walks. And then on June 22nd, so just yesterday, in his most recent game, or I guess that would have been on Saturday there, most recently, pitched 3 2/3 innings, gave up 7 earned runs once again, 4 walks, 5 strikeouts. So right now, I don't think by any means those are the numbers that you're going to want to have a guy called up, and pitch for your starting rotation in the majors. If he's given up more than 3 earned runs at the AAA level, you can't really relate that to being some good numbers to bring him over for the major league. So that kind of shot that idea that I had right down the drain. Was kind of interested on to see what he's been doing and wondering why the Brewers haven't been calling him up. But there's the answer right there. Not good numbers at all. Nothing that's jumping off the board. And if anything that's jumping off the board, like I had mentioned earlier, it's pretty ugly for the most part. Not really what you want to see from a guy that you just signed a 5-year deal with, multi-million-dollar deal. Just not really looking good. So hopefully, of course, as the season develops, we're still pretty, not even midway through the season. Maybe he'll get into a stretch where he's putting together some good outings, and we'll see him called up again at some point. But right now, like I say, those walks, I think, are the most concerning thing, even going back to that Philadelphia Phillies start where he had a pretty good outing. But so that kind of eliminates that option. But like I said, I think Carlos Rodriguez just really quite isn't the guy that's filling in. Like I said, he's doing a decent job filling in for the most part, kind of in that role. But they're going to need to pick up somebody or find somebody else, pull somebody out of that bullpen that's able to come through into these big spots and produce some pretty good outings. Of course, we've already seen that from Tobias Myers, who pitched another fantastic game in yesterday's game, gave up only 1 earned run on 5 innings pitched. And he's been terrific in the month of June. 4-0 now through the month of June in his last 4 starts, so you can't ask for anything more from Tobias Myers, who just continues to deal so far the month of June. Hopefully he's going to probably have, it looks like, 1 more start to end out the month of June, and hopefully he's able to continue that and continue to pitch that way down the stretch. And he's been continuing to do an awesome job. So, like I said, that's been an interesting thing, and something that the Brewers are going to need to fill a role in that starting pitching position, and hopefully able to get some positive out of it, because we're going to need Freddie Peralta to continue to pitch well if we want to have any chance to come down the stretch, because the Cardinals have been beginning to play some really strong baseball. They're only, I believe, 5 games back in the National League Central right now, so over the weekend, that lead that was once 7 games, 7.5, has now dwindled down to 5, which at this point in the season still a very strong lead in the division, but you get any closer and you start to get into a little bit of territory where the air starts to get a little bit thinner out there, and getting a little bit more nervous in terms of losing the potential lead in the division. So that kind of covers everything from this weekend. I know a lot to talk about. Bryce Terang did cap off Saturday's loss, which obviously is not a positive, but he did get his second career grand slam, which was just a little bit too late for scoring-wise. Ended up losing that one 6-4, but pretty impressive to hit a grand slam on a batted ball that was only 93.7 miles off the bat. Usually, so that's not even considered a hard hit ball, and hit a home run off of that. Usually the hard hit rate is typically, I think it's above 95 miles per hour is considered the hard hit rate of a ball. They kind of, that's one of those stats in the offensive category that they look at in terms of those blast rates and other things that they've deemed to be important stats now that I still haven't really, like I said I was going to, haven't had a bunch of time to dive into that and see what's going on there, but very interesting to see that. But that was pretty much the gist of the weekend. Brewers only win 1 game out of 4 against the Padres, go 3 out of 4 for the entire road series, so not too bad, but definitely could have been worse, definitely could have been better as well, but hopefully able to come back and continue to play some really solid baseball at home. Just wanted to touch on one more thing, and this is kind of an exciting topic for me. I like to talk about this stuff. June 17th, most recently, I don't think that I even realized that this was out as in terms of my last podcast that I recorded, but June 17th, as far as I know, is the latest ballot update for the All-Star ratings. I think we're probably going to see another one here later today. I think it seems like they're doing them about every Monday, kind of like how they do power rankings. I'm guessing we'll get kind of the update for the ballot, as there was still potential to vote after this first ballot was released. I believe voting is closed out as of now, but diving into looking at the National League, kind of just want to touch on the National League, see where the Brewers are rating, see where some of these other teams' stars are going to be, get a glimpse at what the Brewers are going to be matching up with in terms of the All-Star teammates, and see where we're at with ratings on those guys. So catchers in the National League, William Contreras right now looks to be running away with that. He's got about 200,000 more votes as of June 17th than any of the other catchers. JT Realmuto in second, Will Smith, Wilson Contreras, who is still kind of impressive at number 4, actually being on the injured list and looks like out for quite a while there. Some of the other numbers definitely not as close. Doesn't look like those guys are really going to be in competition for that spot, but really good to see and really deserving for William Contreras, of course, to see that top spot in the All-Star ballot. For first baseman, Bryce Harper leads by quite significant amount for the Philadelphia Phillies, over 1 million votes at first base for him. Looks like we have Jake Bauers at 9th, who really isn't in too much of a conversation, only at 68,000 votes compared to Bryce Harper's over 1 million. So obviously not anything to see there, but kind of an interesting thing to look at. Second baseman, now this is the one that almost irks me and really stands out to me. So Luis Arias for the Padres, understandably so, not going to discredit him and for him of what he's able to do at the plate. 613,000 votes. He's leading the league. Actually, pretty close race with him and Ketel Marte right now. Marte only traveling him by, it looks like, 5,000 votes as of now. But looking down this list, it gives you 1 through 10. And how about Bryce Turang coming in at number 6 with only 158,000 votes? Now, I understand that a lot of the time, and this is the one thing that I will say that I'm not a huge fan of the All-Star ballot, is it seems like it's a popularity vote, right? Luis Arias was, I believe, you obviously got the batting title last year. I think he might even be back-to-back batting title winners, or at least runner-up or something like that. He's been a very strong hitter, and he has been for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years now in a row. Bryce Turang obviously had a very big struggle last season, but this season, you look at his offensive numbers, he's up there in almost all the categories for second baseman offensively across the league, besides maybe some of the power numbers with home runs, but even his OPS is up there. On base percentage, obviously stolen base, he's leading the league for second baseman in that category by a pretty good tick. And just the differential in those ratings, I would have totally expected Bryce Turang to come in at second. And hopefully, over this last week, as some people and voters have really dove into the numbers, hopefully we've seen a little bit more consistency or a little bit more realization of Bryce Turang and the numbers that he's putting together. But you look at his numbers in the defensive runs saved, he's first in the MLB in defensive runs saved. So he's a full all-around player. We've talked about this several times, too. He's got the offensive potential, and he showed that this year. We obviously saw the great defense last year was lacking that offense, but this year he's producing hugely offensively, especially in that leadoff role. And of course, defensively, he's continuing that and playing a very sound and very strong defensive second baseman. So that was the big one for me that just kind of jumped off the plate. That didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So that was very interesting, I thought. Third baseman, Alec Boehm for the Philadelphia Phillies, over 1 million votes. Joey Ortiz, surprisingly, well, not surprisingly to me, but I am happy to see him obviously way below Alec Boehm. Looks like Boehm is certainly going to be the starting third baseman for the National League. But Joey Ortiz coming in at third for the Milwaukee Brewers, so exciting to see that. Shortstops, Mookie Betts kind of running away with it as expected for the Los Angeles Dodgers, continuing to put together MVP-type numbers as it seems like he has been for the last several years, even going back to being with the Boston Red Sox. So credit to him and what he's been doing. Willy Adames, looking through the list, down in the 5th position in that lineup. Designated hitters, Shohei Ohtani, rightfully so, leading with over 1 million votes in that category. Rhys Hoskins coming in at number 4, which I actually think is a little bit of a surprising number. I like to see him in that 4 spot, knowing that he's getting some recognition there. Outfielders, top 3 right now, Jurickson Profar, as I talked about for the Padres, leading it. Christian Yelich right behind him as second, and then Fernando Tatis Jr. In third place. So as of right now, looking at those numbers, that would mean that those top 3 guys are going to be your starting outfielders, likely either Yelich or either going to be in left field, right field, whatever they decide to put place for him there. So just some really exciting things to see a lot of these Brewers guys getting some very high praise, getting some very high ratings for what they've been doing offensively and defensively, and just playing some really good baseball. So credit to those guys, credit to what they've been able to do, and hopefully they're able to keep it up. And like I said, hopefully Bryce Turang's able to get a little bit more credit, I think, for the season that he's put together. But nonetheless, he knows how he's been playing. He knows how important he has been to this team. And, of course, all the guys around him know that as well. So you can't doubt that at all in what he's been able to do. So with that, wrapping up the episode, Brewers heading home, like I said, to face the Texas Rangers. Going to end up having an off day on Thursday before they face the Chicago Cubs and Craig Counsell for his second return to Milwaukee. I think from my standpoint, from the schedule makers in MLB, I think I much would have rather seen the off day today on Monday. I think that would have been a much better off day, especially coming off that long West Coast trip where you had 7 games in 7 days. I think going back-to-back, that's a little bit of a lengthy travel, obviously, for some of these guys. And then to play back-to-back, of course, at least the Sunday game was an afternoon game. Would definitely be a lot different if it would have been a evening game, I think. But I really would have rather seen the Brewers get that Monday off than I think this Thursday game. But nonetheless, hopefully Brewers are able to freshen up a little bit, not too tired or have too much fatigue there going into this series. Looks like Freddie Peralta will be scheduled to get the ball here in Game 1 later today. Bryce Wilson will get a ball in Game 2, and Colin Rea to wrap up the series in Game 3 for Milwaukee. Looking like that based on the list of the scheduling, that would mean Rodriguez would be scheduled to make the start on on Friday against the Chicago Cubs, and Counsell's second trip to Milwaukee as the Cubs coach. But like I said, I wonder if the Brewers before then will plan to make a move, maybe call up another pitcher, have a different option, try out a different arm there in the starting pitching position. So it'll be interesting to see how Pat Murphy and the management of the team plays that and see what we get from that. So with that, that's basically all I wanted to talk about. Obviously, as usual, just get a little bit of a preview into the following series. As you guys know, Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast is always available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other mainstream podcast sites. So please feel free to listen to this podcast from wherever it is you may like. I can always be reached on social media using @brew_pod on Twitter or by searching Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast on Facebook or Instagram. And hopefully you guys had a good start to the week. Like I said, hopefully you guys don't have to deal with too much cleanup or damage from anything of the storms this weekend. Hopefully you or family members really weren't too poorly affected by any of the storms. And hopefully this week looks like we're going to see a little bit more sunshine, not as much rain, which seems like that's just been a big thing that we've seen a lot of this year is that rain. I think I saw something saying that we had gotten more rain in the month of May alone than we did the entirety of last summer. And we've seen a lot of that continue through the month of June. And not to mention, looking at the calendar, it's like, holy crap, it's already June 24th here on this Monday. So pretty insane to see the time just flying by. Seems like summer hasn't even really begun because of all this rain that we've been getting. But hopefully we're going to see some more promising weather here coming this week and hopefully leading into July and continuing into August. So with that, hopefully you guys are able to get outside, have a good time. We'll see you next time. Talk to you soon. And of course, go Brewers.